The Incoherence of an Eternal Quran. This is Ibn al-Hurriya, Son of Freedom. Purpose of the study: to establish that Islam believes in a Quran that is eternal, uncreated. To show the philosophical problems which flow from this belief. Therefore, Islam is incoherent in its doctrine of the Quran. Therefore, Islam is a false belief system and should be abandoned. Abbreviations: Q is Quran, RT is Reliance of the Traveler. 1. Islamic doctrine holds the Quran to be eternal. Islamic tradition holds that the Quran is an eternal, uncreated source of authority of Islam. Quote, "Nay, this is a glorious Quran, inscribed in the preserved tablet." End quote. Quran 85.21 and 22. Quote, "The Quran is recited with tongues, written in books, and memorized in hearts, despite being beginninglessly eternal, an attribute of the entity of Allah Most High." End quote. Reliance of the Traveler, section V 1.8. 2. If the Quran is uncreated and eternal, then it did not depend on Allah for its existence. Either the Quran is an attribute of Allah, or the Quran is not an attribute of Allah. Although the passage in Reliance of the Traveler, V 1.8, suggests that the Quran is merely an attribute of Allah, the Quran itself does not suggest that. The Quran itself suggests that it has an existence apart from Allah. 3. A Quranic Dilemma. If the Quran is merely an attribute of Allah, then it is meaningless to use a metaphor like that it was inscribed on a preserved tablet. Furthermore, this would tie Allah's hands. Allah could not say anything that was not already inscribed in the Quran. On the other hand, if the Quran has an existence independent of Allah, that is, if the preserved tablet metaphor is not a metaphor but a literal, then the Quran becomes a type of tablet God which has a being independent of Allah. Then Islam has at least two gods and is not monotheistic as Muslims claim. 4. An eternal Quran cannot make reference to historical events. If the Quran existed from eternity, then it cannot describe historical events. The Quran reads as though it refers back to certain historical events. But if the Quran is eternal and uncreated, this referencing back or referring back is a chimera. The fact that the Quran describes historical events that happened in time and before the Quran means that the Quran cannot be eternal. The actual way the Quran reads suggests that it's referencing historical events is not a chimera. This suggests the Quran began in history. 5. The process of gathering objects on which surahs were written discredit an eternal Quran. If the Quran existed from eternity on a preserved tablet, then why did the Quran get gathered and edited on various objects like parchments, stones, tree bark, and fallible memories of men? Islam makes the argument that it was the purpose of Allah to reveal the surahs piecemeal. But to ensure that the Quran is a true copy of the preserved tablet edition, wouldn't it be more reassuring if each surah had been delivered on a mini preserved tablet or some similar medium? The piecemeal and haphazard way in which the Quran was actually compiled suggests that there was never any such preserved tablet. 6. A preserved tablet leads to determinism. If the Quran existed from eternity, then no subject upon which it touches could have been otherwise. Such a Quran gives rise to a deterministic world. There is no longer any human agency that matters. The world is set in stone, literally. Any historical events that the Quran describes are therefore events that could not have happened otherwise. The world becomes an elaborate choreographed stage in which all the actors, humans and Allah Himself, are merely acting out a script. 7. An eternal Quran annihilates moral choice. If the Quran existed on a preserved tablet from eternity, then nothing humans decide to do matters because the history of the world was all decided in advance. This makes human existence pointless. 8. Consequences of rejecting an eternal Quran. Because of the absurdities of an eternal, uncreated Quran, we must conclude that the Quran is a created book. But if it is a created book, then it is false when it teaches that it existed on a preserved tablet. Therefore, the Quran is not inerrant and is therefore a fallible book. Therefore, Muslims cannot be confident that all the other doctrines contained in the Quran are also true. Therefore, it would be more prudent for Muslims to base their lives on some other holy book or on no holy book at all than the Quran. The incoherence of an eternal Quran. This is Aben al-Hurriya, Son of Freedom.